Think of a place where workers can barely pay the rent, queues at food banks grow every year, and organized crime acts without fear, with executions in broad daylight. Now add to that hotels that turn away black customers, footballers compared to animals, and a drugs market that has turned the country into a drug trafficking hub in Europe. Sounds like a crisis scenario in an underdeveloped country, right? But what if I told you that this was happening in the Netherlands? Today, Bello Mundo is going to show you the hidden side of the Netherlands, a reality that few people know about. So get ready, because what's coming up could completely change your view of this country. Number 1. Location and geographical data. The Netherlands, or as many people call it, Holland, is located in the northwest corner of Europe, next to Belgium and Germany and facing the North Sea. But first, let's sort out the name, because a lot of people get it wrong. Technically, Holland refers to just two provinces, North Holland and South Holland. These are precisely where Amsterdam, The Hague, and Rotterdam are located, i.e. the country's most famous cities. As these regions are very touristy and economically strong, the habit of calling the whole country Holland caught on. But the right name is the Netherlands, so much so that in 2020, the government itself decided to reinforce this so that the rest of the country wouldn't feel left out. So here's the tip. If you want to be more technical and avoid a sour look from a more discerning Dutch person, the right name is the Netherlands. But in practice, everyone still calls it Holland, so it's up to your taste. Now, about the territory. The country isn't big. It's about 42,000 square kilometers, but the number of people is absurd. There are around 17.5 million inhabitants squeezed into one of the most densely populated places in the world. And guess what? This leads to problems. Expensive housing, chaotic traffic, and lack of space are just some of them. But if there's one thing the Dutch know how to do, it's deal with water. A third of their territory is below sea level, hence the name Netherlands. And in order not to become Atlantis, the Dutch have built dikes, canals, and pumping systems that are a reference worldwide. They basically challenge the ocean every day and win. The country also has that classic European charm. It's all very flat, which explains the national love of bicycles. And the scenery? Living postcards with windmills, tulip plantations, and fairy tale farms. The climate, meanwhile, is temperate, with a cold winter, a summer that doesn't get too hot, and, of course, the traditional combo of rain and wind all year round. If you ever visit, you already know. A raincoat is a must. Now that we've understood where the Netherlands is and how it works, let's talk about what really matters. What's behind that picture-perfect image of tulips, bicycles, and canals? Because, believe me, there's a lot that nobody tells you. Number 2. Poverty and social inequality. Despite its reputation as a rich and organized country, the reality for many locals is not so tranquil. Poverty exists and affects around 14.5% of the population, around 2.5 million people. And this rate continues to rise, making the lives of those who face this scenario increasingly difficult. But what does it mean to be poor in one of the richest countries in the world? Here, the problem is what is known as relative poverty. It's not just not having enough to eat. It's not being able to keep up with the standard of living of the surrounding society. Officially, someone is considered to be at risk of poverty if they earn less than 60% of the country's median income. In rough numbers, this means living on less than 17,000 euros a year for a single person or 38,000 euros for a couple with 2 children. It may sound like a lot, but in the Netherlands, where housing, energy, and food are becoming more and more expensive, that money lasts almost no time at all. And you can get a clearer idea when you compare these figures with the average cost of living. Data from the Expatistan website shows that a single person needs €2,540 a month, which is almost €30,400 a year. For a family of 4, the bill jumps to €4,630 a month, or around €55,600 a year. Just looking at these figures shows the size of the gulf between what a large part of the population earns and what they actually spend. And the problem is not new. In the last 6 years, the poverty rate has risen from 13 to 15%, and the number of people who depend on food donations is only increasing. Inflation has soared, basic costs are skyrocketing, and rent has become one of the biggest nightmares for those living in big cities. And if the lack of money is already a problem, imagine when you add that to a small, overcrowded territory. Number 3. Overcrowding and urban pressure. As we told you at the beginning, the Netherlands is a small country with one of the highest population densities in the world. And when there are too many people in too little space, challenges arise. Housing, for example, has become a major problem. Affordable houses and apartments are practically non-existent, especially in the big cities. Rents are sky-high, and the competition to get a property is absurd. In Amsterdam, finding a studio at a reasonable price has become an almost impossible mission. Many people end up having to share tiny apartments or move to increasingly remote areas. And the traffic. Anyone who thinks that everything flows beautifully there is mistaken just because bicycles dominate. At rush hour, the streets are jammed, the trains are crowded, and even the bike lanes become a real traffic jam. The rail system is great, but in recent years it hasn't kept up with demand. There are days when getting a space on the train is a victory. And if the routine for those who live there is already complicated, imagine when you add to this the exaggerated tourism. Amsterdam, for example, receives millions of visitors every year, and the city simply can't hold that many people. And the consequence? The cost of living rises, noise and garbage increase, and residents begin to feel like foreigners in their own homes. Many complain that the city has become one big theme park, where everything revolves around tourists while local life is suffocated. And if the lack of space is a problem in itself, expanding cities to try to solve the housing crisis is not as simple as it sounds. In order to build more houses, it is often necessary to landfill areas or tamper with areas that are at risk of flooding. And since the Netherlands already deals with the threat of the sea on a daily basis, any mistake can have disastrous consequences. Add to that concerns about climate change, and you understand the size of the problem facing the government. Number 4. The mafia and organized crime. Moving on to the B side of the tulip country, it's time to talk about a problem that not many people associate with the Netherlands: organized crime. This country, which many people see as an example of safety and quality of life, has a much more dangerous side. In recent years, the rise of organized crime has transformed the country's reality, and at the heart of it all is the Mokro Mafia, one of the most feared gangs in Europe. The name may sound harmless, but this criminal organization dominates cocaine trafficking through Dutch ports and is involved in money laundering, extortion, and brutal executions. The level of influence and violence has reached such an absurd point that not even the country's elite have escaped. Princess Amalia, for example, who is heir to the throne, had to tighten her security and limit her public appearances after reports that she might be kidnapped. Former Prime Minister and current NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has been surrounded by security guards because of death threats. And anyone who thinks this is an exaggeration is mistaken. In recent years, the country has witnessed an escalation of violence that seemed unthinkable a few years ago. Investigative journalists have been eliminated for exposing the mafia. Lawyers for protected witnesses have been executed, and even family members of whistleblowers have been targeted. One of the most shocking cases was that of Peter de Vries, one of the country's best-known journalists. He gained notoriety for covering high-profile crimes and helping witnesses stay safe. But in 2021, he was shot in broad daylight and did not survive. The Dutch government has been investing heavily in security and creating task forces to combat this type of organization. But it's not easy. The volume of money generated by trafficking is huge. Some estimates put it at billions of euros, which ends up corrupting some authorities and officials at ports, airports, transport companies, etc. In other words, for every blow the police strike, the mafia seems to come up with new tactics and routes. Number 5. Drug legalization. To talk about organized crime in the Netherlands without mentioning legalized drugs would be strange. After all, the country's reputation as the land of cannabis has been with it for decades. The problem is that this fame has also led to the famous drug tourism, when visitors from other countries, especially neighboring ones, come to Dutch cities just to experiment without fear of being arrested. In certain neighborhoods, the streets are crowded with tourists in search of the famous coffee shops, where the blessed or cursed herb, depending on your point of view, is the raw material for various products, ranging from famous brand cigarettes to various types and brands of chocolate. This generates revenue, but also security problems, annoying residents who don't want bars full of drunk and stoned people in the middle of the streets. And if there's one place that symbolizes this tolerance, it's Amsterdam's red light district, which doesn't just attract attention for its drug tourism, but for another kind, prostitution. Number 6. Prostitution and industry. For those who don't know, Amsterdam was once a major maritime trading center and, over the centuries, became one of Europe's busiest ports. Sailors and merchants made strategic stops in the city before continuing their journey and, among the many services available, one stood out: prostitution. This is how the Red Light District was born. Today, this historic area is one of the most visited places in the city, attracting tourists from all over the world. But if you think it works like anywhere else, that's where you're wrong. The dynamic there is quite different. Instead of discreet street corners or closed houses, adult entertainment professionals are displayed in store windows, as if they were mannequins in a clothing store. And this tradition goes back a long way. Showcases first appeared in the 17th century and continue to this day, with women and transvestites of different biotypes showing off in the illuminated streets. But this is not exclusive to Amsterdam. This type of trade also takes place in 12 other cities in the Netherlands. And if you're wondering why these shop windows, the explanation is quite practical: the cold. In much of Europe, prostitution takes place outdoors, but here, with very low temperatures for much of the year, it makes much more sense to have an enclosed space. And the most curious thing, this profession has been legalized since 1911. In the Red Quarter, for example, the workers rent out their shop windows, pay taxes, and can even retire. But the neighborhood isn't just about shop windows. The area is home to attractions that explore this universe in a more cultural way. One example is the Museum of Erotica, which has everything from sensual presentations to a collection of forbidden drawings by none other than John Lennon. And for those who like unusual experiences, there's even an adult movie theater showing a not-so-childish version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. A film that I'm sure would never be shown in a kindergarten. But there's more. The Red Quarter is also home to some of the world's most unusual condom stores. If you think you've seen it all, there are condoms in the shape of a giraffe, a Christmas tree, a cow, a minion, and even a Formula One Ferrari. And if you're looking for a special touch, there are glow-in-the-dark models, bizarre flavored versions, and even vegan options. But it's not all fun. The dark side of this industry is forced exploitation. Although prostitution is regulated, not all the people who work there are there by choice. Reports and investigations show that human trafficking and the coercion of pimps are still part of this reality. Organizations that fight human trafficking warn that even with laws that are considered advanced, many of these workers may still be in a situation of exploitation. Number 7. Racism and discrimination. And to conclude our journey through the dark side of the Netherlands, let's talk about prejudice. The Netherlands loves to sell the image of a progressive, open, and multicultural country. But does the reality live up to this hype? Well, if you ask the many minorities who live there, the answer is a resounding no. To begin with, the figures speak for themselves. In 2022, almost 800 hate crimes related to racism and xenophobia were recorded by the police, in addition to more than 4,000 incidents of racial insults. And that's not counting the cases that are never reported, either out of fear of retaliation or simple disbelief in the system. And don't think that the problem is limited to anonymous offenses on social networks. Racism in the country is also institutionalized, and this was more than proven in 2022, when a report revealed discriminatory practices within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs itself. Black employees reported systematic exclusion, racist jokes, and even offensive nicknames. One of them heard a colleague refer to African countries as monkey countries. Yes, within the government. The scandal was so great that the Dutch state itself had to apologize publicly. But let's get out of government offices and into everyday life. Imagine planning a trip, booking a hotel, and suddenly receiving a message saying that your accommodation has been canceled because they didn't accept black people. Sounds like something from the distant past, right? But it happened in 2023, and the target was Rio de Janeiro artist Wallace Pato, who was in Amsterdam. The case went viral and exposed what many people already knew. Black immigrants faced difficulties even finding a place to sleep. The hotel claimed that it was a cyber attack and that the message didn't come from them, but does anyone really believe that version? And anyone who thinks this doesn't reach sport is mistaken. One of Dutch soccer's greatest idols, Ruud Gullit, has already exposed racism behind the scenes in the national team. He revealed that black players are systematically excluded from management positions and that, even when they do get in, they are not given real opportunities. And this problem is not new. Back in 2015, a group of Dutchmen were fined for comparing black players in the national team to monkeys and slaves. The controversy started when midfielder Leroy Fer posted a selfie with other black players from the team. The outpouring of racist comments was so absurd that the Dutch FA had to come out and condemn the case. In other words, nothing has been done in the last 10 years. NGOs and those affected continue to press for tougher laws. But the road to a truly egalitarian society still seems a long one. So, after all this, are the Netherlands still just tulips and windmills to you? Did you enjoy this tour of the lesser talked about side of the country? If you've been there or know someone who has, please leave a comment below. We want to know what you think. And of course, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe, share it with your friends, and stay tuned for the next videos, because we still have a lot to explore in this Bello Mundo of ours. which is often not so bellow. See you next time.